Welcome. My name's Maria Loftus, and I'm one of the medical school admissions consultants here at Kaplan. Prior to joining Kaplan, I was the Assistant Dean for Recruitment and Admissions at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. I always have to take a breath with that because it's kind of a long name. So I was there for about 20 years, and during that time, I had the wonderful opportunity to get to represent all of the Western medical schools, that's Colorado West, to the National Committee on Admissions, which is a standing committee of the Association of American Medical Colleges. Not only did I represent the schools for many years, but then I went on to chair the committee. And what was really great about that experience was that I would work with admissions committees across the country on not only best practices, but while I was there teaching them, I was learning about what they did. And what made that really fascinating was to learn that schools did things differently. Well, certainly we all have the same goal and objective to admit the best class possible, to produce the best physicians. We did it in a little bit different ways. And the things that we thought were important, the timing of when we were looking at different aspects of the application varied from school to school. Well, since I retired, I now work with clients here at Kaplan and help them put forward their best application because I want to see them be successful. And so this has really been tremendously rewarding and, to be honest, a lot of fun for me to work with our clients. Well, today we're going to be talking about the interview process. And right now we're in the midst of an atypical interview process. In any other circumstance, applicants almost always would travel to the location of the school and they would have a face-to-face interview. Some medical schools would do regional interviews, and so it was possible that you might not be going to the school, but I would say probably 95% of the time, applicants would travel to the medical school, spend at least the day, sometimes a couple of days at the medical school, going through both the interview process itself, but also whatever recruitment activities the school wanted to include at that same time. Right now, as I'm filming this, we're in COVID, and schools have had to shift entirely to the online, the virtual format for doing interviews. And I think that produces for not only the schools, but certainly for the applicants, kind of a heightened sense of what's this going to be like? So I'd like to talk about what we know, what we suspect is going to be happening, and how you can best prepare to shine at your interview. The first thing I think everybody should be appreciative of is that there are going to be different types of interviews. And those different types of interviews can take many forms. There are going to be schools this year who will do an asynchronous interview. And by that, I mean you and the interviewer are not talking to each other. There may not even be an interviewer. It could just be that you will be filming your response to a series of questions, and that is happening live, but there's no actual person on the other end. Or possibly there is a person on the other end and they have filmed their questions, to which then you are giving your video response at a separate time. Of course, other schools will be doing a synchronous interview, meaning you'll be meeting over perhaps a Zoom format, and you and your interviewer will be looking and talking to each other just as though, or similar to just as though you were doing it live in person. So that's one of the differences that you will see this year, is whether it's a synchronous or asynchronous virtual interview. There then are also other ways in which interviews are going to be different. They've always been different from school to school, but it'll be amplified a little bit more in this virtual environment. There will be traditional interviews, of which there are two different kinds. There is what's called a long form traditional interview. And those typically are interviews that last more than half an hour, and it will feel more like a conversation with your interviewer. Hopefully it has something to do with your application, that they're asking you relevant questions regarding why you want to go to medical school and what your experiences have been. But sometimes it's just whatever the interviewer wants to talk about. And that might be, how are you and your family dealing with the pandemic? Or it could be, how is your university dealing with online learning? Or are they coming back for in-person classes? Or whatever it is that strikes that interviewer to talk to you about. This can feel a little disconcerting to you as an applicant because you're thinking, this doesn't have anything to do with my application. Shouldn't they be asking me about my application? Well, the schools that do long-form traditional interviews and that allow their interviewer to ask you whatever they want are schools that believe that the interview is really just to confirm that you are as nice and wonderful in person, or in this case, over the virtual world, that you're just as nice a person as they saw on paper, your paper application. So they're just confirming that you're a great person that they would love to accept. And so if your interviewer isn't asking you application-related questions, don't worry about it. Just go with the flow. The other type of traditional interview is called a short-form traditional interview. And these tend to be more in the neighborhood of 20 minutes or less in length. And in these situations, the interviewers have a pre-formatted set of questions that they're going to ask everyone. This is much more likely to be a type of traditional interview that you might find embedded within an MMI style interview. And we'll talk more about MMIs in just a moment. So with the short form, as I mentioned, the interviewer has a list of questions that they need to get through. And if you know that you're going to have a short form interview, you want to think about your answers as being short and concise, maybe in the range of 30 seconds to 90 seconds in length for your answers, because they've got these list of questions they need to get through. Typically that would look like, if the interview was supposed to be 20 minutes long, perhaps they've got 12 questions they need to get through. If it was only going to be 10 minutes long, then they might have 6 or 7 questions they need to get through. So, like I said, you really want to be on the concise end and practice how you would give that kind of an answer. Then we also have the MMI interviews, and the MMI stands for multiple mini interviews. This was an interview style that came about from a school in Canada, and about 50 schools or so of the allopathic medical schools, and then also a number of the osteopathic medical schools, use the MMI. Typically, a school will have half a dozen or so stations, and you go from station to station in which there is a scenario, there's a prompt, there's something you're being asked to do, and you have 2 minutes to prepare for your response. So you get the prompt, you read it, you think about it for 2 minutes, and then you would enter a room and you would respond for 5, 6 minutes and talk to your interviewer or to the camera, and you would talk about, these are things that you would think about, these are things that you would want to know in order to plan your response. Now, you might be wondering why a medical school would do this type of an interview, the MMI, where you go from station to station and you have these different scenarios. Well, there's a number of reasons. The first and probably most important from our perspective is we want to understand your thought process when you're in the artificial situation of not knowing everything you would want to know. And that's what happens with the doctor every single day. So every single day with just about every patient, they walk into the exam room and they've only got a limited amount of time to interact with the patient, hear what the patient has to say, and start to draw some thoughts, some plan for moving forward as to what tests need to be run, what kinds of things might be wrong with the patient, what is the decision tree they need to go through. And so we want to hear your thought process when you are presented with an ambiguous situation, ambiguous prompt of what is it that you would want to know, what are the kinds of things you would be thinking about. So that's the first and foremost reason for us as to why we have an MMI. For a secondary reason for us, and I think probably a primary benefit for you, is you're not just interacting with one interviewer or two interviewers. You're having the opportunity to show your stuff, show your ability, show your skills and knowledge, your personality multiple times. And as I've mentioned, it's typically 6 times, so that there's 6 different stations. So the most common of these stations, as I've already said, will be a scenario in which you are all by yourself and you are responding to an interviewer or to a camera. But different medical schools include other types of stations at the MMI. It could be a group activity, you and one other applicant. It could be you and many other applicants, but you have a common goal in mind in terms of what it is that as a group you've been asked to do. The important thing to remember anytime you're in a group MMI is that the object of the MMI is for you all to achieve the goal. It is not a situation where one person wins and everybody else loses. It is how well do you function as a team? And that's what we're assessing. It's your teaming skills. So you want to be the best team player possible. There are also schools that will have a writing station as one of the MMIs. So they are very interested in your written communication ability, and knowing that lots of times applicants get help with either their personal statement or their secondary essays. Schools want to see your true written communication abilities. And so they may have you respond to a prompt that says, for instance, that you just interviewed for a job. And here's the job description, and here's the people you interviewed with. Now write a thank you note. Something that you could easily do in 5 minutes, and it allows them to see your written communication skills. There is also the possibility that you could have an acting scenario, and that actor on the other end could be your interviewer, or it could be a real somebody from the drama department that is acting out a role. These roles will almost always be a conflict situation where the other person, the person that you are responding to, is in a heightened emotional state. And so what we're assessing is your ability to handle a conflict, to manage and help someone come down off of their emotional stage. So the interview might be, or the situation might be that they're a patient who's been waiting for you in the exam room for an extended period of time, like 45 minutes or an hour, and they're starting to get pretty annoyed that they've been waiting for so long. And you, as the physician, walk in and they're ready to give you a piece of their mind. Or it might be a car accident, a fender bender. Neither of you are hurt, but the other driver is very upset. And so the point is for you to manage that conflict, to be calm, to active listen, to show how you as a physician would be able to respond to emotionally charged situation with a patient. So there are also different kinds of questions that you could be asked in either a traditional or an MMI. And basically, while there certainly are nuances from school to school, these types of questions fall into 3 different forms. They're either a behavioral question which is asking you to tell the interviewer about a time when you had this kind of an experience or that kind of an experience. There's also what's called a general interview question, which is a question that has to do with you. And this might be, why are you interested in our school? Or why should we accept you? Or why do you want to be a doctor? It's asking about you, not about a specific experience. And then, of course, there are situational questions, questions that are asking you to imagine yourself in a future situation, how you would respond to that. And this is where the MMI really shines, because they are virtually always going to be a situational question, but they require you to reflect back on past experiences you've had, and to perhaps include in your discussion things that have happened to you before. So it becomes kind of a behavioral question where you share, I've had an experience that was kind of sort of similar to this, and that is helping me decide how I would approach this new situation that is presented in the prompt, and to talk about that thought process out loud. Things that you would want to know before you go to your virtual interview is going to be whether or not it's going to be a live synchronous interview or it's going to be asynchronous. You would probably want to know what kind of technology format they're going to be using. Is it going to be Zoom? Is it going to be something else? Just so you can make sure that you have that technology embedded in your device, should that be something you need to take care of ahead of time. You'd like to know how many interviews you're going to have. Is it going to be a single interview? Is it going to be multiple interviews with different interviewers? Is it an MMI or a traditional? If it's a traditional, is it the short format or long form? You also ideally would like to know what kinds of questions they're going to be asking. Is it going to be behavioral questions or situational questions or general? And if at all possible, you'd also like to know what kind of essential competencies, what are the essential competencies that they're hoping to assess through your interview. Not every school is going to share this information with you. Some are very transparent. Others, I don't think it's that they're trying to be secretive. It just doesn't occur to them to be transparent. If this information isn't included on either their website or in your interview invitation, you can always try calling the school and asking questions. And this is something I would say to applicants all the time, even when I was dean, is I would say, you can call and ask. You don't have to give your name up front. You could just call and say, hi, I'm an applicant and I've got a question about whatever your question is. Or, hi, I'm an applicant and I've been scheduled for an interview and I was wondering if you could tell me whatever your question is. If the person on the other end of the line sounds cranky and irritable and like you should never have asked that question, you can hang up. They don't know who you were. There's no harm, no foul. If on the other hand, they sound warm and welcoming and that they're happy to answer your questions, if there's a reason for you to give your name, certainly feel free to do so. But try to get as much information ahead of time, because if you know what kinds of questions they're going to ask and what competencies they're trying to assess, then you're able to pre-think about experiences that you might want to share that would demonstrate that you possess those competencies. And you're going to go into the interview feeling way more prepared. Before the interview, you also, of course, want to review your application, review your responses to their secondary questions. Just make sure that you're up to date with your own information. This may not seem like applicants make a mistake, but sometimes in the nervousness of the moment, they forget that with one school, they responded to a prompt, a secondary prompt in one fashion. with another school, they said something quite different. Well, at your interview, if you get a similar question to what was asked in your secondary essays, you don't want to repeat word for word what you said, but you certainly want your two answers to not contradict each other. So go back and refresh your memory with what you've said. You also want to remember why you applied to a particular school. And hopefully that is something that you conveyed in your secondary essays. But if you didn't, remind yourself, why did you apply to that school? Because a very, very common interview question is going to be, why did you apply to our school? And they expect you to have specific reasons, and reasons ideally that are in alignment with their mission statement, with the type of physicians that they want to graduate. In thinking about the virtual interview, be cognizant of what your background is going to be. You want your background, what the interviewer is going to see around you. And when I say interviewer, in this case, again, you could be doing an asynchronous interview. So I don't just mean a real interviewer. It could be whoever is viewing your video. Think of them as the interviewer. You want them to view you in a professional light. So of course you want to think about, is your background, does your background look professional? That doesn't mean by any means that you need to have a green screen behind you, although maybe you should. Because if you are going to have to film your response in your bedroom, maybe you don't want to be showing anything that is personal. Certainly, you don't want to be showing things that are personal, like your bed, like your dirty laundry, like a political poster on the wall. So, while some of these things may occur to you to take down, others may not. And you want to make sure that it is as sanitized, may not be the correct word, but as professional, certainly, as possible. You want to think about your lighting. What kind of lighting? You want your face to be fully exposed because they are going to be interested in seeing your facial expressions. And so ideally, you're in front of a window. The window is lighting your face fully. If that's not possible, make sure your lighting is as bright as possible and is illuminating your light. The one thing you don't want to have happen is that your light is behind you where your face is in shadows. To the extent that you can control for external noise, you want to do that. You don't want to have your family members or your roommates creating noise. You don't want to have a device in your room that is going to ring, the room where you are doing your filming, that you're going to hear a phone ringing. Ideally, you don't want to have, a garbage truck going by or your dog barking or the doorbell ringing. So do whatever you can do to try to control for external noise that would not only distract you and maybe throw you off your game, but would be distracting to the interviewer as well. Think about your clothes that you're going to wear. You should be dressed just as though you were going to a real live interview, in that you're dressed in a suit. And you can't just dress the top portion of yourself, because something might occur that causes you to have to stand up. So don't be wearing, your jacket, a shirt, a tie. If you're a woman, a necklace, a professional suit on top, and then have shorts on the bottom. Just in case, make sure, you're entirely dressed professionally in case you have to stand up. I get questions all the time from my women clients just about jewelry, hair, makeup. Same thing holds true, in that you want it to be professional. If you're somebody who's going to play with your hair, then put your hair up. Your jewelry should be conservative. Makeup should be conservative. This is not going out on a date. It is going to an interview. So however you would dress for any other kind of interview, make sure you do it the same way for this virtual medical school interview. I think one of the harder things to keep in mind in this situation of the virtual interview is eye contact. When you're looking at a person face to face in real life, I think we all have eye contact down pretty much, right as it should be. In the virtual world, there's oftentimes your camera is not conducive for appearing on the other end to be looking as though you're looking at your interviewer. So you want to make sure you're looking at your camera when you are speaking. And I hope this, probably doesn't need to be said, but you want to make sure your camera is at an appropriate height. You don't want your camera at the bottom of your computer looking up your nose. That is not a flattering look for anyone. And it's going to be distracting for your interviewer. So it should be that the camera is looking at you, but you also want to make sure that you are looking into the camera. Now, right now, my situation is my camera is above my computer. And so if I was conducting an interview right now, in order for me to be looking like I'm looking at them, I really can't see them. So certainly when you are speaking, you're going to want to be looking at your camera, something in the neighborhood of, 70 to 80%, which would be on par with the eye contact you would have in real life in a face-to-face. You wouldn't be staring intently all the time, not blinking in a real life. So you don't want to be doing that in a virtual interview. But on the other hand, you don't want to be looking away. And if that means that you've got to look up or look to the side, wherever your camera is, you want to make sure that when you're speaking, you look like you're looking at them, which means you're looking at your camera. Versus when they're talking, it's totally okay for you to actually be looking at your screen. Because when they're talking, they're probably looking at their camera and they're not even aware that you're not looking at them from their perspective. They're not even aware of that. So go ahead and look at them when they're talking so you can see facial expressions and read that nonverbal communication. But when you're talking, make sure you're looking at your camera. If you're going to be taking notes or having a glass of water, those are certainly things that in the real world face-to-face interview happens all the time. But in a virtual world, your interviewer cannot always see what's taking place off camera. So I would suggest that you just mention ahead of time at the start of the interview that you ask, is it okay if I take notes? Is it okay if I have a glass of water here? So that they know if your hand or your face, looks someplace else, they know what is likely to be going on, as opposed to wondering, what is it that your hand is doing? So just go ahead and ask. The other things you're going to want to think about and plan for are a stable internet connection, which might mean that you need to shut down all of your other devices. It might mean that you need to ask your roommates not to be streaming at the same time that you're doing your interview. I think most people probably know that the bandwidth you have coming into your house is usually larger than the bandwidth you have going out, because most of the time what we're dealing with, what we want is we're streaming things in as opposed to streaming things out. Well, regardless, if somebody is streaming in, it starts to interfere with your ability to upload your video in real time to the admissions committee. So you want to make sure that as much as possible, nothing else is interfering with that bandwidth while you were doing your interview. It also may mean that you want to talk to your cable company about upping your bandwidth for that period of time and the extent to which that you come off of Wi-Fi and you're going to be hard connected to the internet. It's whatever you can do to try to ensure that your internet connection is stable, because you don't want to be freezing. Either the interviewer freezes and you can't hear the question, or you freeze and they can't hear your answer. Of course, it is always possible that something unexpected could happen. And so you do want to have a plan B. You want to have the what if my computer dies? What if we have a thunderstorm and my connection gets knocked out? What do I do then? And that's something you might want to talk to the school about ahead of time. If something happens, do I call in? Just so you know, it'll help really alleviate your anxiety in that unlikely event that you need to go to your plan B. Just knowing that you know what to do if something happens. You do want to practice in every sense of the word. You want to practice for an interview. That was true before in a face-to-face interview, and it remains true today in the virtual environment, is practice. You want to practice filming yourself. You want to see what you look like on camera. You want to make sure that you look the way you want to look, that your camera angle is appropriate, that your sound level is appropriate, that everything is just the way you want, and then to duplicate that on the interview day. A couple things just to remember when you're answering your questions. If it is a behavioral question, a question that is asking you to tell the interviewer about a time when you had such and such experience, is you do want to reflect accurately and briefly, factually talk about that experience, and then look for opportunities to talk about what you learned, how you grew, how your perspective changed. If this new knowledge you were able to apply in a subsequent experience, go ahead and share that with the interviewer. That, this experience taught you X. You took that information, and the next time you had something similar happen, you were able to apply this knowledge. That's important to us. All of life is a learning experience. We want you to learn from everything that every experience that you've had, mistakes that you have made, that you learn from it and you do better. And if you see an opportunity to talk about why this is an important experience to you, why you think this will help make you a better doctor, then, mention that. I'm really glad I had this experience because it will help me as a physician to remember blah, blah, blah. If instead it is a situational question, a question that is asking you to imagine a situation and what you would do, again, you would want to share not only the salient information in terms of here are assumptions that you would be making, here are decisions and things that you would be doing, and why. Why do you think that would be important? Share that with the interviewer. And of course, if it's a general question about you, then share information in a transparent way about yourself. Look for opportunities to talk about, again, things about yourself, your personality that you are working to improve, things about yourself, your personality that you were happy you possess because it's part of who you are, and why that's something that you're proud of. But be transparent in talking about yourself. So I hope that this has helped and that you feel more prepared as you go into, whether it's your first interview or your fifth interview, that you have a little bit better understanding as to what the medical schools are looking for and why we might ask certain types of questions. If you have a question, don't hesitate to write it in the comments section below, and we'll make sure we get back to you. And certainly, if at any point in the application process you want help, just let us know. That's what we're here to do. Thank you very much for joining us today.